confusion about that. In certain portions of the code, the public highway includes a parking lot that is explicitly excluded in this section on line 47 of the language there. The next section is the handheld ban language. This is similar to the language that left the House in House Bill 874, Elliott Bourne's bill. The next section of the code starts in line 96. This is the seatbelt section of the code. This deals with two issues here. It extends the requirement to wear a seatbelt from both the front seat to also the back seat and would make that a primary offense. And then, Mr. Chairman, the last two sections, starting on lines 147, is safety inspections, where the frequency of the required inspection is reduced from every 12 months to every 24 months, similar to House Bill 1439. And the final language in here is section 46.2-1300, which starts on line 161. And this would allow local governments to lower speed limits below 25 miles per hour in certain residence districts. There are two enactment clauses, Mr. Chairman, on this bill. There's enactment clause 2, which delays the effective date of the handheld open container and primary seatbelt until July 1, 2021. And I do believe a technical correction is needed to that to reference the new traffic infraction section there instead of the 18.2. And then there's a third enactment that requires reporting by the Executive Secretary and the Supreme Court back to the legislature on the enforcement of these new safety policies.
Thank you, Secretary Donahue. I think the first thing we can do is move the substitute for the committee.
So moved.
Second.
All those in favor of the substitute say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? All right, and then with the technical amendment, I have to figure that out.
Mr. Chairman, as Nick noted, there needs to be 4 technical amendments on lines 19, 23,
15.
15, yes, 15, and then in the enactment clause, it's just changing 18.2-323.1, which was the section regarding open containers, to the new traffic infraction regarding open containers 46.2-800.4 and 27.
All right, if everyone's comfortable, we'll entertain a motion.
So moved.
Second.
All those in favor of the technical amendments, just say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? All right, I think having thoroughly explained the bill, Madam Chairwoman, President Pro Tem, will entertain questions from the committee at this point.
Yes.
Be careful, you maybe should do it.
No, I don't have a question for the patron. I have a question because,
Delegate Collins.
I'm sorry, Mr. Chairman. I'm looking at line 47 where we're now defining public highway and vehicle parking lot. I have real concerns about that given the most recent Supreme Court rulings in Virginia regarding public highways, regarding parking lots when it comes to our DOI section. Have we looked at this to make sure that we aren't just about to define something in the code that we've been utilizing in the DOI sections for 20 years?
Mr. Chairman, to Delegate Collins' question, the purpose of the amendment of this definition is only for this single section of code. It does not change any other definition that's in law or how that may be used today.
Mr. Chairman,
Delegate Collins.
the problem is we don't define public highway in the Code of Virginia. We when it comes to DUIs, the Supreme Court has ruled that a public highway, a parking lot has been defined as a public highway because there's public ingress and egress from the public highway, so you can charge a DUI in a parking lot, but I don't believe we define parking lot. So I have concerns about that language here.
So, Mr. Chairman, to Delegate Collins' question, again, this would not change any interpretation that is currently used in the DUI section of code. Line 47 stipulates that for purposes of this section, it shall not include that. So if you were to be pulling someone over for a DUI and you got them in a parking lot, the DUI law would prevail and this one would not apply in that section because, again, this definition is only applicable to this new section of code.
Any other questions from the committee? Does anyone in the audience wish to speak in favor of this bill? Does anyone in the audience wish to speak in opposition to this bill? Oh, brave soul.
Oh, I know. Excuse me. Bruce Kennedy, representing a coalition of those that are strongly supportive of maintaining your annual safety inspection program. You've heard a lot. I do want to point out that the bigger concern that we've taken a look at this is that with the number of vehicles that are getting older and the greater number of miles that people are driving, that you've increased even a greater risk, and you can expect the failure rates to be even higher. which then causes more accidents, more concerns, traffic tie-ups, economic impact, etc. Thank you.
Thank you. Anybody else? Hearing none and seeing none, the committee operates by, actually, Madam Chair, final word.
Mr. Chairman, I'm just waiting on your motion so I can get back down and come or something.
Committee operates by motion.
Mr. Chair, I report the substitute.
Move to report the substitute as amended.
Second.
Mr. Chair, perhaps an alternate. I think the question that delegate has raised, which is above my head, over my head to even determine if that's a valid question. So I'll make a motion that we consider sending this to, referring it and to courts to help resolve that question.
Mr. Chair,
Report and refer.
this is a revenue bill, so we just need to keep in mind, the time constraints on it. We wouldn't have time to go, we would have to get it to the floor, too quickly.
Understanding the concern of Delegate Rock.
To report and refer, this is to report, Robert.
Got that on the substitute, second and substitute motion.
If I may, so if.
Delegate LaRock.
If you're advising that there is not time to do that, then I'll withdraw my motion and hope that if there are questions, that they will be dealt with as the bill moves through the House.
Having withdrawn the motion, I think there is a proper motion to report that's been seconded as the substitute as amended. So all those in favor.
Does it have to be referred to?
Bring it a full first.
Gotcha.
Right. Yeah. So all those shall cast their votes on the electronic voting pad. All right, clerk shall close the roll. By vote of 4 to 2, Senate Bill 907 reports out. Thank you, Senator Lucas.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and members of the committee.
Senator Deeds still here?
Right here, yeah.
All right. Senator Deeds.
First bill I've got is 289. A person with a traumatic brain injury can react to things differently because they had their brain injuries. What 289 says is that if they're diagnosed with a traumatic brain injury and they can produce something in writing from a physician, if they have a traumatic brain injury, the commissioner of DMV can or must identify that if the person who wants, they can identify themselves as a traumatic brain injury patient on their driver's license. It's nothing new. We identify certain conditions on the driver's license right now. It's about giving the officer who might stop someone who might suspect they're under the influence because they're acting funny, about giving that officer a little information. Certainly, if he has reason to believe they're under the influence, there's nothing about the TBI identifier that prevents him from investigating, but it's about giving him information, giving the officer information. That's what the bill does.
All right, any questions from members of the committee? Delegate Homer.
Mr. Chair, I'd just ask the senator, so are there indications that providing that warning elsewhere is because I recognize it can be a significant administrative burden, Mike's not adding this, I know we've got other things. Are there indications that having that indicator on the license in other states or research has an impact on the way police officers address traffic stops?
There's an indication that it's just the more information is better. There are certain conditions right now that can be on the driver's license. Nelson, do you know what they are?
It's insulin-dependent diabetes, autism spectrum disorder.
Other things that may affect the driver's ability to communicate or reaction, and certainly TBI is that sort of condition. It's consistent with autism or diabetic reaction.
Any other questions from members of the committee? Anyone in the audience wish to speak in favor of this bill?
Brain Injury Association of Virginia supports the bill.
Anybody in the audience wish to speak in opposition to this bill? Hearing none.
Move for report.
Second.
All right. So moved and properly seconded to report Senate Bill 289. All those shall cast their vote on the electronic voting pad. All right, clerk shall close the roll. 6-0, Senate Bill 289 reports out.
Thank
Senator
you very
Deeds.
much. The next bill I've got is Senate Bill 290. and this bill just makes some changes to chapter 750 of the Acts of Assembly of 2019 to make our law consistent with federal law, and it's necessitated by federal regulatory action delaying the compliance date for certain provisions of the act that we passed last year. Again, Millicent Ford is here to answer detailed questions, but I can run through some of it permits DMV to release medical information related by the department, FMCSA solely for the purpose of auditing. It strikes a provision requiring individuals to take a CDL or refresher course subsequent to failing the general knowledge or skills exam a third time. Before taking the exam a fourth time, it reduces the burden on CDL applicants. Since applicants will be required to train prior to taking tests, once ELDT becomes effective, this does not pose a highway safety concern. It permits DMV to waive skills and general knowledge examinations for commercial driver's license applicants in line with federal regulations. I mean, and I can run through a litany of things, but essentially what this does is just brings us in compliance with federal law with respect to CDL exams.
Okay. Any questions from members of the committee? Anyone wish to speak in favor of this bill from the audience? Anybody opposed to this bill?
I will also make a motion to report, unless you want him to give the final word.
No, I think he'll live with your emotion. It's been moved and properly seconded that we report Senate Bill 290. Members shall cast their vote on the electronic voting. By a vote of 6-0, Senator Deeds, you're out.
Thank you very much.
All right, we have a couple of housekeeping items. I see Senator Higgins is here, and Senator Surville, I believe we're going to put your bill into his. That's okay with you?
It's a different bill, so we did not do that on the Senate side. I'd rather not.
Okay. Well, Senator Surville, come on up.
Mine's when you text them, I'll run.
We'll do hands-free first.
Hands-free, yeah. I have no problem conforming my bill to Warren's bill, although he did make a change on the Senate side to move it to a different part of the code, put it in chapter 800 instead of chapter 1300.
Which is Warren's bill's my bill from there.
Yeah, okay.
So if you want to make them identical, he didn't have a problem doing that. We created a new code section in 46.2.8 something to put it in traffic code.
We have a motion to conform it to the version that's passed Senate Transportation.
So moved.
Second.
All right, all those in favor of conforming, say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? Senator Surville.
So the bill, as stands, basically is the same hands-free legislation that you all saw last year that died in the conference committee as an enactment clause that requires some education and study and record keeping to ensure we're not doing racial profiling. But I think the bill, everybody's, I assume, is familiar with the bill from last year. I don't think anybody here since committee did it.
All right.
Got a first there, so.
Yeah. Are there any questions from members of the committee? Anyone in the audience wish to speak in favor of this bill?
Lieutenant Gilbert, Sheriff's Association, we support the bill.
All right. Anybody wish? Oh, go on. Got another one.
My name is Christina Dempsey, and you heard my story when Delegate Bourne spoke up about me when I was in here, that I'm a huge supporter of this bill.
Jordan Sheldon Williams-Allen, representing AAA in this bill.
Janet Woodbury Drive, Smart, Virginia, we strongly support it.
Thank you.
Champ Early Virginia Bicycle Federation, we also support the bill.
Anyone opposed to this measure? Hearing none, committee operates by vote.
I'll make a motion to report. Second.
All right, moved and probably seconded to report as substituted. Senate Bill 160. Members shall cast your vote on the electronic vote. All right, clerk will close the roll. Vote 5-1. Senate Bill 160 reports out. Senator Surville, I think you have a second bill.
I have two more.
Okay.
Next one, Senate Bill 246. Senate Bill 246 is a bill that would allow somebody to indicate their non-binary in terms of their gender on driver's license. Right now, DMV software can only accept male or female. They were intending on administratively implementing non-binary, but they also wouldn't mind having some statutory authority to back up that decision. The Real ID law actually does not require, well, it requires the state to indicate a sex, but it says indicate a sex
Questions from members of the committee? Delegate LaRock.
Yes, non-binary, yes, is non-binary defined in code?
No. Any other questions from members of the committee? Anyone in the audience wish to speak in favor of this measure?
Equality Virginia would like to support the bill.
I'm Patrick Antline, and I represent myself. Although I'm a member of He, She, Z, and We, which is a support group for parents of trans kids. I'm the parent of a non-binary teen, and this bill is important for me, but it's critical for my kid. Next month, they'll be 17, and they still don't have their driver's licenses because there's no way for them to accurately indicate their gender on the application. This hits them economically, makes it hard to get and hold a job, and socially they're being denied achievement of a key milestone in their development in the march towards successful independence. So I hope it'll be a favorable body to support the bill.
Thank you.
I'm Ted Lewis with Side by Side, the largest LGBTQ youth organization in Virginia. We support this bill, and as an individual who is non-binary who would take advantage of this, I implore you to pass the bill. Thank you.
Anybody wish to speak in opposition to the bill?
Already been introduced. Josh Hudson with the Family Foundation. Just want to point out a couple of things. Obviously, there are philosophical differences here, but I think, I hope the subcommittee will really discuss the meaning of non-binary, not just in a philosophical sense, but as a very practical sense. What will that mean for law enforcement when someone is stopped and they give them their driver's license? What if they're taken into a jail or a prison? How will the law enforcement know how to refer to such a person as maybe in terms of pronouns? There are many, many questions that I don't think have been adequately thought through, that are just very practical, good governance questions. I think too, we run the risk of creating something of a Christmas tree. We know that Facebook has something like 27 genders. That may work for Facebook in a cultural sense. I think when we begin to do this into law, it creates some havoc. The final thing I want to point out to you is that I think this may actually be an unintended consequence to the bill. Currently, sex is one of the components that is to be designated when somebody fills out the application to get their driver's license. And this new language actually allows any person to choose male, female, or non-binary. So biological male might choose female, and they may do this out of fraud. I think there are some fraud concerns, and I don't think perhaps the bill is intended to do that, but it doesn't run around the current requirements for changing one's sex on their birth certificate, which has greater requirements. But in effect, most people don't carry around the birth certificates. What they do is they have an ID to demonstrate who they are and what their sex is. So I think this could be unintentionally creating an end run around that portion of the law. Maybe it could be tightened up. So thank you for your consideration.
Thank you. Commissioner Holcomb, do you have anything to comment on this bill? It's fine if you don't. Your name, your
Mr. Chairman, members of
agency's
the
gonna vote.
subcommittee, as the patron said, first of all, 16 other states in the District of Columbia have done this, and the world as they know it has not ended. State police is here to talk about any consequences that law enforcement may have. I won't speak to that, but again, 16 states have done it with no problems.
Thank you.
Question for
Delegate LaRock.
This would be appropriate. So, Commissioner, when you say they've done it, meaning it uses the same wording, or they've maybe?
They've added the option of a non-binary. It may not be the exact same words, but the end result is the same.
Okay, thanks.
All right. Any more questions from members of the committee on this bill?
I do have a question for the patron.
Delegate LaRock.
Just out of curiosity, I guess, and it's partly to kind of toy around with the concept, did you consider just erasing the markers altogether? How would this be different other than, and partly because of the Christmas tree comment that
Mr. Holcomb, Secretary Holcomb, just to go.
Yeah, I wanted to, but as I said earlier, Real ID rules require us to collect some sort of gender, and so we don't have a choice if we wanted to have Real ID.
Thank you. But this is driver's license. How does this connect with Real ID?
I think it applies to both.
I'm sorry.
Real ID versus driver's license.
Real ID is a driver's license that's just been upgraded to allow you to use it for federal purposes, but we do have to have, Real ID requires that there be a sex data field, but it leaves up to the state to decide how to fill that. So if we eliminated the sex altogether from the driver's license, we'd be in violation of Real ID.
Thank you.
Delegate Homer.
Mr. Chair, I'm not sure if the question's for the Senator or for Mr. Holcomb, either one. If the feds make a change around Real ID and requirements on sex, what is the administrative burden gonna be I'm worried, I'm very supportive of this bill, I'm very worried about the administrative burden we might place on the DMV if there's a federal change that impacts it.
Mr. Chairman, Delegate Helmer, the only change that would impact us is if they said, there would be no change on this because they're still requiring, and we're gonna be in compliance because we will have sex on the driver's license. And then the federal government says, but it's up to the state to determine how you populate that. So if they in fact later on determine that, no, you have to go back to male or female, I'm sure we would be back before the General Assembly next year to remove this option.
Thank you, Commissioner Holcomb. Anybody else wish to speak on this bill? Hearing none, the committee operates by motion. What's your pleasure?
Move to report.
All right, it's been moved and properly seconded to report Senate Bill 246. Members shall cast your vote in the electronic voting pad. I'm sorry, the clerk will destroy the roll. I had a note from Madam Buck here that this is going to have to go to appropriations, so that the motion actually be report and refer.
Move to report and refer to appropriations.
All right, it's been moved and properly seconded to report and refer Senate Bill 246 to appropriations. Members will cast your vote on the electronic voting pad.
You've been here long enough, you should know this.
So it's constant. Alrighty. Alright, close the roll, that's 5-1, bill reports, we'll be reporting for full.
Thank you.
One more, Senator Servo.
Senate Bill 437. 437, I believe, is identical to the legislation that Delegate Sullivan carried last year. It's a bill I've been trying to get through for, I think, 4 years now. Basically, it's what you call a vulnerable.
Senator, do you have an amendment on this?
Oh, I do, yeah. I have a technical amendment.
Madam Chair, do you
Madam
like
Buck, will you report the amendment?
The amendment, this was a technical amendment, a drafting error. On the beginning of line 21, strike 18.2, 369, and insert 18.2, 51.4. It's just an incorrect cross-reference. As written, it cross-references the definition of serious bodily injury or disease, which isn't the term used in the bill, so it just fixes the cross-reference.
Get the amendment before us. Say that louder, let's get the amendment before us.
Oh, so moved. Sorry.
All right, all those in favor of the amendment, say aye.
Aye.
I missed my tablet dog bell.
Yeah, there you go.
All right, let's-
Senator Servo.
Hey, Mr. Chairman, so this is what's called a vulnerable user bill. This came to my attention 2 ways. One is that I rode a bike across the United States of America, and I've been hit by cars 3 times now in my cycling career. And I'm acutely aware of the realities of riding a bike and bike vehicle collisions. But secondly, the NCSL had a bike pedestrian or cyclist pedestrian safety conference about 7 years ago I attended, where I became aware that many states had adopted these kinds of statutes. They're called vulnerable user statutes. And what they do is they reduce the quantum of proof necessary to hold somebody criminally responsible when a car comes into contact with a bike or pedestrian. The reasons for that are numerous. Number one, cycling and pedestrian deaths are growing in this country way faster than actually vehicle deaths. That's in part because I think people are more distracted, which I hopefully we just dealt with a minute ago with the bill you passed about hands-free. But also more people are biking and more people are walking. And the reality reality is that when a cyclist or pedestrian is struck, is that often the individual is concussed or dead, and they don't make a very good witness when that happens, and they can't really articulate what happened. And the forensic evidence that remains on the vehicle and on the bike is very inconclusive as compared with two cars coming in collision with each other. So basically what the bill does is defines a vulnerable road user as a pedestrian or somebody who's operating basically anything other than a car, or a motorcycle. And then it makes it clear that if a vulnerable user receives a serious injury, and that's the cross-reference we just fixed, which is defined, analogized to the malicious wounding statute. So it basically requires more than a bruise or a road rash. It basically requires very serious injury, broken bones, concussions, stuff like that. And the collision occurred because the driver was either distracted or careless. Then the person can be held responsible as a Class 1 misdemeanor. That's the first part of the bill. The second part of the bill, by the way, just clarifies that you can't use a bike lane to pass another vehicle. There's some jurisdictions in Northern Virginia, I believe in Haymarket actually, where the police chief thought there was ambiguity about whether or not a vehicle could travel in a bike lane to pass another car, and we just want to make it clear that you can't. That's what the second part of the bill does. I think Vivian Watts might have carried this bill or a version of it, I know in prior years, and maybe this session as well. But in any event, this statute, from my perspective, is absolutely necessary. I don't know if any of you all practice criminal defense, but if you do, there's a case called Powers v. Commonwealth, which is a defense, it's a reckless driving case. It basically says that in a reckless driving situation, the happening of an accident does not equate to reckless driving. You have to prove something about the manner and circumstances of the driving in order to get to home plate on reckless driving. And when you have a dead or concussed pedestrian or cyclist, you can never do that. And so cyclists and pedestrians frequently don't find any kind of satisfaction in the criminal proceedings because of this. And because of that, we need to bring the law up to speed with reality, and that's why I put the bill in. I think that's why you're going to hear from the cyclists and some other traffic safety people who support it.
Thank you, Senator. Before we get to the advocates, does any member of the committee have any questions for Senator Silva about the bill?
You have a question.
Delegate Helmer, do Delegate Helmer.
Yeah, Mr. Chair, I asked the senator, so given that I'm still I'm struggling, so I'm very supportive of the second half of the bill that clarifies that you can't pass in the bike lane. In the first half of the bill, given that we've passed the we're going to pass the distracted driving, and then we have 46 to, you
guys passed distracted driving?
I'm sorry, we passed that.
That was my building too.
I'm sorry, I'm sorry. Hands-free.
Continue.
Hands-free, and that we have 46 to 852 on the books already. I'm still struggling with a case where someone acts in a way that's clearly reckless. Like we have tools available to that, notwithstanding bike lane. Like what does this do this?
Well, I think if you ask any of the cycling advocates around here, they'll tell you that the reckless statute is pretty useless when it comes to bike and pedestrian collisions, because the cyclist and pedestrian can't say what led to ending up with no memory of what happened. And that's been my experience as well. It's very difficult to prove a reckless driving case where somebody's seriously injured when you're dealing with a cyclist or pedestrian. The hands-free law only has to do with hands-free driving. It doesn't say anything about being distracted or careless. It just simply says if your phone's in your hand, you're guilty of a traffic offense. That's it. A traffic offense is only punishable by a $250 fine. This creates a Class 1 misdemeanor consequence for giving a serious injury to a cyclist or pedestrian while distracted or careless. And it's a very different concept than the hands-free law.
Delegate Helmer.
Sure, just quick follow-up for the senator. If somebody, I'm very sympathetic to it. I'm just saying if a cyclist or a pedestrian is themselves reckless, is hit or whatever, the same challenges are going to remember what happened if they're concussed or whatever. Like, how does this shift this doesn't really shift the burden of proof in a material way. So the same person who's concussed and can't recall whether it was because they crossed the line or because the vehicle crossed the line is going to provide the same poor witness for this. That's why I'm still struggling to differentiate.
Well, it actually lowers the burden of proof because often what happens in these cases, and again, the cyclist behind me, I think can confirm this, is that law enforcement shows up with the same either dead or seriously messed up pedestrian or cyclist on the ground, and they go to the driver and say what happened, they say, I never saw him. And usually, you can tell by some kind of forensic evidence, sort of who was coming from what direction, and roughly where the strike occurred. And often, you can say, you should have seen him, but.
So you should have seen it as it stands.
Yeah, well, and the careless or distracted can get you to that. The problem with the reckless driving statute, again, is this Powers case from 1965, and if you read the fact pattern, you would say, how in the world did they not convict that guy of reckless driving? But it was, some car went flying like 1,000 yards, and you got ripped out, wrapped around a tree, skid marks all over the place, went into a field, hit a cow or something. I mean, it was crazy. And the Supreme Court said nobody proved how that happened, therefore you can't prove them guilty on a reasonable doubt.
All right. Delio, I have a question. I'll also note that we have now lost our quorum, so we can hear, but we can't vote. So we can continue taking testimony on this, and hopefully somebody will come back. But
Okay.
at the moment, we're down one. Delio Ross.
Probably wait to ask my question when we get a voting member back, just on a long shot that it might matter to somebody else.
Okay. Okay. Well, and that, I think the committee will go at ease.
All right.
I'm coming right now.
Y'all can blame Scott.
We just did. On the sign-up list, I mean, I thought I was number 2, but I guess we'll get to that later.
You're soon, I'll tell you that. I'm trying to go round up some.
He's in the chair representative. I just checked.
Okay.
show you the, as we get ready to break the But when we make reference to it, we'll say like Article 21, disease, and we'll do the first section. So the best way to search for it is to go in and go to the LIS general page, go down along here, and you can search along, you can search bills and resolutions. And then if you put that section in, any bill that makes reference to that section will come up. Yeah, so it's in there.
I wore this tie to intimidate you.
So that's, yep, that's the best way to do it. Yes.
You're messing with the right person. I know. All right. Here we go. We're gonna come back to order. Quorum has been restored. Sorry. All we're talking. Senator Servo, is there anyone in the audience who wishes to speak in favor of this measure?
Sarah Taylor with the City of Alexandria. Our Commonwealth's attorney, our police, our transportation folks all support this. We know that protecting vulnerable road users is a very complicated issue and that there are many ways that we need to address this. We're working on it in our community by addressing dangerous intersections, doing outreach, doing education, but we also know that increased penalties of some consequence are an important part of this. Our Commonwealth's attorney told me a story yesterday of a gentleman who was hit by while crossing an intersection by a vehicle, was killed, and it was because it was simply for a failure to yield. The man, the driver was blinded by the sun, didn't yield to the pedestrian, hit him, killed him, and the only thing that he could be given was a $250 traffic ticket. And unless you prove that someone made a bad choice and actively made bad choices, that's how you get to reckless. That's not how we get to careless. And so this is a enhanced penalty of consequence that we believe, our Commonwealth's attorney believes, our cops, our courts believe is something that we need in order to properly protect vulnerable road users in our community.
Sassol just called my name again. Look at all of these people who are.
I know, but I literally.
I know. Go ahead. We'll step off unless we're gonna vote. Go. We're gonna vote. Well, does anyone else want to speak in favor of this bill, knowing that Delegate Norris?
Mr. Chairman, Bruce Ray, Champion of the Virginia Bicycle Federation. To Senator Servel's point, we've had a 57% increase in the number of pedestrian fatalities in Virginia. We had 126 people die last year, up from 80. And a quick point to the delegate's question, I think about a Navy SEAL, Dan Hirsch, down in Virginia Beach, 2008. Rode every day, fitness buff. He's riding his bike, I believe on Shore Drive. He's blinkies, helmet, reflective clothing. A lady runs over, he flies 100 feet through the air, killed instantly. She says, didn't see him, she didn't get a ticket for that. I don't think she was doing anything reckless, and she wasn't charged with this thing, but she got off without a traffic ticket, and this Navy SEAL died needlessly, and that's what I think we want to address here.
Are anybody opposed to this measure? Are there no other questions from the committee? We operate by motion. Second. Yes. So moved and probably seconded to our fourth amendment on Senate Bill 437. Members of cast your votes in the electronic voting pad.
I'm just saying, patron, I'm gonna throw out a no, just because I think there's questions that are legal in nature and I'd like to have the full committee.
Got it. Clerk will close the roll. So make it count. 4 to 1.
Sorry, thank you twice. I gotta run downstairs.
All right.
You gotta have another vote on it.
Jason, no. Okay. Record
No voting?
Apparently. All right, clerk will close the roll. 4 to 2, Senate Bill 437 reports out, and we now have no quorum, so we will go at ease until